and welcome to Journeys and Journals. I'm Bernie Martin Beck, and I get to meet the most interesting people to share with you. And today it's going to be all about East meets West, or we're going to hear the stories of people who are world travelers, and I love it. Please welcome the Wilkenses. Carl and Teresa, welcome.
Thank you.
So what brings you to Southern Oregon?
Well, this was our home for almost the last 12 years. We had no idea where we would land when we came back from Africa, when we decided that it was time to come back to the States. And it was a wonderful place to land back in 1996. We had been through some horrible times in Africa, and some of the most wonderful times. That seems how these kind of mix together at times. And to come and land here in the valleys of Southern Oregon was a wonderful landing spot and a wonderful 12 years. And we came back just this weekend for graduation at the high school there, Milo Academy.
You're talking Douglas County.
Yep.
A little bit out of Roseburg, or?
Yeah, just outside of Canyonville, east of Canyonville, a few miles. You follow the Umpqua River, upriver there towards Tiller, and you find this beautiful covered bridge that crosses over the Umpqua and onto the campus of Milo Academy, a place I think you're really familiar with.
Right, I was a student there, but this is the area. I mean, it is gorgeous.
Yeah.
Milo, well, welcome back. Now,
thank you.
We are interested in your long story, but why don't we get acquainted with Teresa?
Mm-hmm. Well, I was raised in the Northwest between Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. I claim them all as my background. Carl and I met back in the 70s when I was a junior at another school similar to Milo up in Spokane, Washington, at Upper Columbia Academy. Carl came out as a senior and made quite an impression on the girls in our school with his good looks and really nice personality.
Teresa used to come and steal my grapes. I would bring my lunch. I was a village student. She was a dorm student, and would sit out on the nice weather there in the fall. Mm-hmm. And I remember her and her friend coming and stealing my grapes. But what I really remember was when I saw her sit down at the keyboard and her incredible gift on the piano. And we were friends for 4 years or 5 years before it kind of moved from friends to another level.
I just had a little chance to talk to your wife, and she had seen that possibility before you did.
She has those wonderful insights, and to be able to see ahead in the future. But some of us are a little bit slower. But it's incredible too when you really think on a more serious note. None of us has any idea what's really ahead at times, and where we may be going. And it's just so such an incredible gift to have somebody next to you for no matter what you're heading into, to be able to know, that you've got somebody next to you. This presence, this whole concept of presence is something that has become more and more evident, and I think very much meaningful in my life from the different experiences we've been through and the people who have been present for us. And so, yeah, you'd never guess that, as high school kids and then in college together, 30 some years ago, just where the journey and the path would lead us.
Teresa, you tell me that you were married, how much longer did this honeymoon begin?
We were married in August, right a week after we graduated from college there at Walla Walla. And 6 weeks later, we found ourselves in Zimbabwe.
Not on vacation, not on a honeymoon. What was your
setting up home?
Well, it was like an adventure, though, Teresa was 22 and I was 23, and I look back now and I think, wow, that seems so young. But we had graduated, Teresa with a business degree, and I had industrial ed, a high school shop teacher. And we were in Zimbabwe to teach auto mechanics, welding, actually started a program, went south, got a grant from McGee's Bakery, and had some money to go buy welders and sets of tools, wrenches and sockets and things to set up a industrial arts program in Zimbabwe back in 1981. And so that was our first introduction as a married couple. I actually got to go to Africa as a college volunteer back in 77, I think it was, to the Transkei down in South Africa in the late 70s. So that's kind of where our Africa experience began there. And Teresa used to send me, in fact, cassette tapes back in the old days when we sent tapes back and forth with her piano playing. And so it was then that I fell in love with Africa. And she said she'd go with me anywhere, and ended up there. And Zimbabwe was, of course, a very different place then than it is today. But there's still the potential. I was just back there last summer. The potential is still there in the country and in the people. The people incredibly courageous and resilient for such hard experiences that they're passing through right now. But that was our first home.
What was it like? What did you take with you?
Well, being fresh out of college and not having a whole lot of money, we basically took our wedding gifts.
Yeah,
and
right.
we, many of our family friends had also, in lieu of gifts, had given us money because they knew we'd need to purchase, but it was better to buy it once we got to Africa. So we basically packed up our wedding gifts and a few things we had on, from our college years, and headed over with that.
To a little trailer.
To a trailer. They called it a caravan there, and it was probably
like
15,
a 20 foot. Yeah. Trailer
long.
With a built-on toilet on the side, the ablution block.
Yeah.
You used to have to pull the couch out to make a bed.
Every day.
that was home until we built a home there on the mission property there, Lower Gwelo Mission, there outside of Gweru in Zimbabwe. That was, that little yellow trailer. I was just there actually last summer and looked about the same 20-some years later.
Oh, it survived.
It has. It's still there. Somebody was still living in it.
What's the weather like? What's the terrain like?
I think Teresa feels like she was made for Africa in many ways.
It's warmer.
Yeah, it's just gorgeous weather. Zimbabwe got a little cooler in the wintertime. You get a little ice on the dog water dish, but basically was really nice climate there, and great for growing your gardens and things like that. We later went to Zambia, a little farther north, working at a mission hospital there, Yuka Mission Hospital. We had to go by boat to reach this place. It was a really remote location, and just surrounded by the floodplains of the Zambezi River. It would eventually go down, over Victoria Falls there as it worked through the African countryside. But all the places we lived, and eventually in Rwanda, just gorgeous climate, and wonderful people. It seems so foreign to most people, Africa. You think about jungles, or I don't know what different people think of now, but for us, it was a great place to start a home. Mm-hmm. It was a great place for our two girls were born there in Zimbabwe, Mindy first and then Lisa. And so a lot of people think what would you do with small kids or something? The whole country is full of small kids and things in there. And it was for us a great place to begin our married life together and to raise our kids.
It wasn't so great for me at first, though.
Why?
Because after maybe the fourth day there, just hit me a really huge combination of probably serious culture shock and then fear.
And a little bit of homesickness?
Yeah, that was there as well. But I think probably I was more paralyzed by the fear than anything else. And
yeah, Zimbabwe was at that time, it had just received its independence. And we were living in what they called the Midlands, which was between the two major groups, the Shona and Ndebele groups in the country. And there was a fair amount of instability. In fact, a huge tragedy had happened just before we arrived. More seasoned missionary couple had been murdered on the western side of the country. And that was huge. You can understand. I'm all excited. I've been in Africa for a year before. I'm coming back. I'm bringing Teresa, very excited. But as all of a sudden that honeymoon stage sort of arriving in a new place wears off, those fears are very understandable, because it was still a relatively, in many ways, fragile and somewhat volatile
Where were these
potential.
missionaries from?
The UK.
The UK. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they had kids in high school at another school there in the country. So they were of the age, parents of high school boys. And they were on a remote mission station, not so different from the one we were on in the middle of the country. They were in the eastern side of the country when just random violence that was happening. And this man and his wife, their lives were taken from them. And so it was a huge change for Teresa. Marriage is a huge change, much less coming to another continent and a whole different culture and things like that. And so, yeah, I remember her sitting on that couch we had to pull out for our bed. I remember sitting there and saying, "Take me home, Carl," crying. And I'm like, "No, it's not so bad. We'd signed up for 6 years, but we have a furlough in 3 years." And it's not like that.
No, I'm not staying here 3 years.
That means a home visit, huh?
It was, yeah.
Break.
And it was interesting that, after some time, the way that a place works its way into a heart, our hearts and stuff. There were times when I was like, "I want to leave." And Teresa was like, "No, and today she would go back there in a heartbeat.
And did? Have you been back?
Have been. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we had the opportunity this last April, and we'll talk some more about that later, to go back to Rwanda, which was our last home in Africa. Yeah.
And that's really the story that we read about and hear about.
Yeah.
And because Rwanda, I mean, it's tears every time I think. Where were the children born? That's an interesting question. I mean,
we were still in Zimbabwe when our first daughter was born. Actually, a couple of years after we'd lived there 2 years, and she was born there in Harare, the capital city, and we lived about 3-hour drive from the capital. So each time we'd go to Harare about once a month for medical checkups, and everything went very well.
Was she birthed 3 hours away, or was she birthed at your...
Yeah. Fortunately, my folks were visiting. I mean, we're living in the country. And so when it got really close, we went up to the folks' house for the weekend. Mm-hmm. And then it was a Friday when the action started. Mm-hmm. And to have her born there in the main hospital in Harare was a pretty interesting experience. They would bring the babies out in a little cart like it was at a nursery with about 10 little babies there. And of course, you see all of these little Zimbabwean babies, and then boop, here's a little white face, and then more babies in the carts as they'd bring them to the mothers. And it was interesting.
No problem picking yours out of the room.
No. And then we were in Zambia when Lisa was born, but we came back because of the remote location where we were and different potential complications. Came back to Harare for Lisa's birth. And then we came back to the States after the first 6 years in Africa. And I went back to school and got an MBA. So with the business technology combination, we then went to Rwanda. But before that, it was while back in school that Sean, our third and last child, was born. And so when we went back to Africa for the second 6-year term, we were going back with all three of our children, and Sean being the youngest. How old was Sean?
He was a year and a half when we arrived in Rwanda.
Yeah, so he was just a tiny little guy.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you do for formula and what do you do for baby food? You didn't get the little jars.
No, there was baby food available in Africa and in the towns, in the grocery stores.
But this mom, and that's incredible.
I did nurse all three of my kids, so we didn't even need formula.
Wonderful.
What we remember were those cloth diapers and those nappy buckets, and how wonderful when we came back to the States it would be to have disposable diapers and all of those conveniences.
Nappy, I hadn't heard that word. You're a bit British, aren't you?
That was that influence in Zimbabwe there at the time. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, Milo Academy was a wonderful place for me to go to school, and I had already known about the covered bridge and the connection here with the Corwin family were my family friends, and so to have that, meet you folks there, and you were teaching at Milo?
Well, actually the chaplain there at the academy.
And so, from there, you had gone as a student. What was that experience? Was that in Africa as a young student?
Well, went to Africa first as a what they called from Walla Walla College, a student missionary, a volunteer program similar to Peace Corps.
Right.
And that was the first time Walla Walla. We didn't really know about Milo at that time. I think during the college years, Teresa had visited once here. She traveled with music groups and things like that, or a wedding. What it was. Music. Yeah. And so we really didn't know about this section of Southern Oregon. We were just familiar with Washington more and the area there where we were living up in Spokane, Teresa, in the panhandle of Idaho. And so when we had the opportunity at the end of our years in Africa to come back, I remember driving down I-5 from Portland, had rented a car, and getting to Roseburg and thinking, wow, I hope there's pine trees around here, because there were these hillsides with these oak trees on the hillsides around Roseburg, and we come through the gorgeous Willamette Valley. But then as we got down into Canyonville, we saw the pine trees, and it was October. And so we're driving out along the Umpqua River, and the trees are turning their colors, besides, of course, the thousands of acres of BLM. And as we came onto that campus, we're like, wow, this feels like home. This feels like a great place to land after our time in Africa.
The first time I went there was the Corps ones, to visit them, and this covered bridge was just, wow.
Yeah.
Well, this day and age, people go there, take pictures and camp and go across this covered bridge, but it's not the original bridge. Now,
No, flood took it out, right?
Well, I think it weakened, and so they said, well, we'll build a real top-notch bridge, just a bridge, and build this structure on top. So it's not, quote, a covered bridge, but it's a covered bridge. Does that make sense?
Yeah. With a great swimming hole underneath it. And one of the best ones around. Last night we actually ended up having to jump in the river after the 8th grade graduation, a little tradition. And those first swims in the river, I think a lot of people can relate to some of the wonders and privilege we have here in Southern Oregon.
Well, I'd just like to ask Teresa, what kind of things helped you to get over that first shock of tears?
Well, I honestly did not think I would get over it. I had no expectation that I'd ever get to where I would want to live there. But Carl said to me, well, we were planning a trip to South Africa to purchase a vehicle, to get other supplies, to get set up with our home there. He said, let's just give it till after that trip, then we'll talk about it again and decide then. And of course, along with that, he wanted to pray about it. But I didn't think prayer was going to make any difference. I was so sure that I was miserable. But we did take that trip to South Africa. We a little more time in the new continent and looking around, seeing, getting familiarized with a new country. I'd never lived in a different country before, and of course praying about it. I see that as one of the times in my life where I know God just took something I thought was impossible and changed my heart.
Carl's mentioned your keyboard expertise. What did they have there for you to play?
Well, that's a good question. Actually, on the campus where we were, there was an old piano in the church. And so the first several months, anytime I missed playing the piano, I'd go up there to the church and play the piano. But then another missionary family in Harare was getting ready to move back. I think they were from Australia, and they were heading back home. And they had a beautiful piano. And, of course, as soon as we heard that was available, we bought that and brought it down to our home.
I was lucky enough to snap a picture of you at the piano, and she played Chariots of Fire, folks. And I'll tell you, it moved me like... Carl, you came back a few months ago to do something unique. Why don't you tell us what you were asked by Kay Campbell Dickey to do?
Well, back here to Grants Pass, Kay was facing her third time with cancer. and the professional community had said there was nothing more. And when Kay called me the early hours of one morning to ask me to do her funeral, which seemed to be, inevitable, I of course said sure, would be happy to come there. But and we talked longer. We read some text together, I remember, and had a good visit on the phone. Called her back several days later, though, with the idea saying, Kay, why wait? I mean, this sounds maybe kind of strange, but I had a friend who did a living wake, and I didn't even know what's the right terms or anything like that. But I said, Kay, you have so many friends, and so many times we come to services afterwards and wish we would have said things or had opportunities to say things before. And I also said, nobody listens like they do at a time when somebody realizes their days are really, really numbered. And why not get friends together and let's have a celebration of life. Let's have a celebration of friendship. And so she was a little hesitant at first because she didn't want this to be a celebrate Kay thing. But when I talked about celebrating the gifts of life and the gifts of friendship, it's things that she very much connected with. And so different friends came together, family members, and pulling this together, making it happen here so that a month ago, we were able to come together and really celebrate the joys of friendship and relationships, and to see so many of her classmates from Milo Academy come together and talk about those memories, back when we did all those silly high school things, and then to see them gathered around her wheelchair and recognized, wow, we are so fortunate with so many things that we often just don't take time to say thank you or take time to just enjoy or even revel in those things. And it was a very meaningful experience for all of us who were able to be there. Music and everything was not only beautiful, it took on just this deeper meaning. And we all, I think, left with a sense of wanting to be more intentional with our lives, with the words we speak, with the actions the choices we make. And Kay is still courageously hanging on to life. And that's such a hard challenge sometimes when you think it would just be so much easier just to lay down and close your eyes and say, I like to go to sleep in the arms of my shepherd. But you know what? It's not always up to us. And we have to just trust.
Well, I loved it because you and I and 300 other people came to that program. A celebration it was. It gives everyone a new perspective on, this is like graduation only in gold star graduation.
Yeah.
So thank you, Kay, if you're watching today. Thank you for all you've done. She was a fellow worker at Milo.
You bet. We worked together there at the Academy. She's involved with recruitment, development, alumni. Yeah. And
I know that money's been given to the school in her name, and it's a worthy cause. It really is. The two of you have been together through thick and thin, babies and bad times and good times. We've heard about your scary times. How big is that trailer?
Yeah, that little 20-foot trailer so many years ago.
Very little.
I mean, that was, and you realize, later, that really pales in comparison to some of the things that did lay ahead for us. And I hope we'll have a chance, to, in a further program, explore just where the journey went there in this little mountain kingdom, this beautiful little mountain country, Rwanda. And how when our kids, our 3 kids were so young, we had moved there with the humanitarian arm of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, ADRA, Adventist Development Relief Agency, building schools and operating health centers, and the war that came to that country. We won't go into all of the history that's behind that war, but the 3 years of tragedy, turmoil, loss of life, and then a hope of a new peace, a new broad-based government, and that hope eventually shattered with the shooting down of the president's plane April 6th. And then the killing that started at that time. And I think that this opportunity, while Teresa and I are here, want to be able to share what some of those first days were like. I mean, within 45 minutes of the plane crash, we were hearing the gunfire and people in our neighborhood were losing their lives. And Teresa and I had a decision to make at that point. And it is interesting, we were still relatively young when you think about it. 30, I think I was 36 and you were 34 or 35. And we had 3 small children, and the killing is just going on throughout our neighborhood. What do? The rest of the international community has decided to evacuate. We had 2 young people in our home who worked for us, had been with us, one young lady for about 3 years, and their ID card said Tutsi, which was the group of people that a small group in government had decided they were the ones that our country would be better without. This whole common word now, genocide, was this thinking that says my world would be better without you. And we had to decide what were we going to do at that time. And Teresa just mentioned earlier about prayer and thinking prayer, what's it going to do here? I'm miserable. We got to get out of here. Well, this was a time after several years in Africa now, probably about 10 years in Africa. We had other decisions to make of prayer, whether or not what we would do. And after a lot of prayer and conversation, we decided that I would stay back here April 6, 1994 in Rwanda, the worst 100 days of the last century in the terms of loss of life, and Teresa and the kids would evacuate. And that choice and that decision has, without a doubt, affected our lives. And I hope we'll get another chance to talk further about that.
We will. Teresa, thank you so much for being a guest here, and so that we could kind of get a feeling for this happily married couple who, as I gather, went separate ways.
Well, 3 months separation.
Oh, well, we'll be hearing a lot more about that in the rest of the story. Thank you so much for being our guest.
Thanks for the
here.
opportunity.
Thanks for tuning in to Better Life Television. This is Bernie Beck for Journeys and Journals.